thank you. Thank you very much. This is cool. I've wanted to get to LASCON and haven't, and here I am, and I'm enjoying today. Thank you. This is, if you were looking for like smart people telling you technical stuff, that's later today, earlier today, and tomorrow. If you're interested in an old guy's view of the world, hang on. So, InfoSec history, how did we get here? This is something I've been working on for a few years and dramatically revised it for LASCON. So how did we get here? This is not actually the route I took. I was in Georgia and came from Jacksonville, and that's not really what I mean anyway. But how did we get where we are now? It's a question that philosophers, scientists, and drunkards have asked since the dawn of time. How did we get here? An aside, if I ever write an autobiography, it will be called "It Seemed Like a Good Idea at the Time." But for some of you who may not know, and nobody should, I'm just a boring old man. How did I get here? Well, I'm a displaced auto mechanic. I'm not an expert in anything. The last thing I was an expert in was the big logos on the top, especially Renault. I was one of the foremost Renault technicians in the Northeast. That level of masochism has served me well moving into InfoSec. You'll note other things like Saab and Peugeot and BMW and things. Cadillac during the 80s, for those of you who remember how horrible those were. It was a time when GM mechanics wouldn't make fun of those of us who worked on Renaults because of what Cadillac made in the 80s. But anyway, that was it. And I ended up forced into automotive management. And the short version, automotive management, that means I wasn't afraid of telephones and computers, and so I was responsible for them. Did more and more over the years until one day, all I was doing was working on computers. Did the MCSE mill thing, got the certification treadmill. I got tired, I got leg cramps on the certification treadmill and jumped off. Discovered local user groups and local security communities, local technology communities, because they're really valuable, especially for those of us that have no budget, like everybody in security, right? We have no budget. And through that, I eventually, I started blogging, picked up some consulting customers, focused more and more on security until one day I made the plunge, joined Vendorland, started traveling more and more beyond just the Northeast. I've been on the Security Weekly, formerly Paul.com podcast for about 4.5 years. We don't call it that anymore. Ask Paul about trademark sometime. About 4.5 years ago, I joined Tenable. We're the Nessus people, and so my day job is sitting around and thinking about and talking to people about vulnerability management, continuous monitoring. And actually, though, I have a pretty cool job. I get to do whatever I want. Last year, I was on a 3-person team with Marcus Random, Space Rogue, and myself. Let's just let that sink in. That means Space Rogue was the young idealist on our team. Space Rogue is in a different team now. Now it's just Marcus and I. It's a 2 cranky old man, and the terrifying thing is that makes him the young one and me the idealist. So anyway, that's basically how I got here to LASCON, which is not really what I meant either, but how did the industry get here? And before we go on, I've got a confession. I don't know this stuff. I have to research it. Part of the reason we teach things or give presentations on them is to force ourselves to learn things we should have known already, right? So, teaching is a fantastic way to learn stuff you thought you knew and actually learn it. So don't laugh, we all are. The nature of the history of InfoSec is this. It doesn't matter if you've been in this industry for decades or if you're new and making the transition, you hit the ground running and run forward trying to keep up. And we just don't have the time to look back and see how we got here. So with that, this is an ongoing project. I owe a lot of people a lot of thanks. Becky Bass was fantastic. She is in a myriad of ways. Marcus Rannum. Within the CISSP community, there's a bunch of bitter old men, actually there's a couple of women, known as the usual suspects. It's a private list. They were very helpful. A friend of mine created an accidental group Skype chat, which is one of the most amazing things ever. He was copying and pasting a couple dozen security friends from one Skype account to another. And instead of copy paste, he launched a group chat over 2 years ago. It's kind of like invite only IRC in Skype, and it's whatever. Staff was instrumental. Staff has really helped a lot. And for the WebAppSec stuff, I know he's at the F1 now, but Arsnake was a huge help. We were sitting at Isla, the Caribbean tiki place downtown, and had a conversation that led to me heading in this direction with this. So why do we care? Some of it doesn't matter, some becomes obsolete. But imagine instead of being an InfoSec, you were kid and you got into metal. I'm looking at the age of the audience. There's some people here that are now or were metalheads. Maybe some of us that were into punk. How did we get those kind of things in our lives? Well, one of the, you do a little musical archaeology. And this is proto-metal. This is Link Ray, his big single. And if you listen to this, it's pretty simple. This is a guy, he and his brother did he and his brother were in a country act, and he transitioned into what would become rock and roll. That song, Rumble, has the distinction of being the only instrumental widely banned in the United States from airplay, because it was called Rumble, and that power chord thing, that was not right. This was 1957, the year that Volare was the #1 song. The #1 rock song was Wooly Bully. This guy took the classic country stroll thing and 53 Les Paul just started cranking what we now know as the power chord. And there's the foundation. If you listen to his stuff, it's like, oh, that's the British invasion, that's some psychedelia, that is all of heavy metal, that is punk because it was a pure punk attitude. And we have this, but you can go to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and you can see these people, not him because they're idiots and haven't inducted him, but it's easy to find this. It's not always easy to find the people in our industry, especially the real founders. There are a lot of folks we do know, but some of it, especially before we get into WebAppSec, things were different, right? Cyber security wasn't really a thing. Security was just part of what you did. Some people specialized in it. The approaches were different. It was a lot of crypto. They were trying to solve secure communications. As I mentioned before, so many people are pouring in. We can't keep up. We don't know our own stories. A lot of the older stuff isn't even a 404, right? If a paper is written or a presentation is given and Google doesn't know about it, did it happen? Apparently not. A lot of them were military, government, and educational. I think in this audience, in this location, I don't have to give the government military intelligence disclaimer that I do at some hacker cons. There are a lot of really good people who are and have been through the centuries in military intelligence. And if you have problems like I do with some of the excesses of NSA and GCHQ, it's not with the people in the trenches who built the industry that we're in and are still doing good stuff. But that's a barrier. You know, a lot of military stuff and a lot of government stuff is classified or segmented, a lot of educational stuff. Higher ed, you know, it's a set of silos. And in our industry, we're a set of silos. So we don't always know about it. A lot of them are no longer active. They've retired, passed away, or, you know, even worse, some of them are in management. Not on the con circuit, at least not our con circuit. So let's start with a few folks that we all know the names of. And I won't dwell on these, but let's focus on the fact that these are not just technologies, these are actual people. So Diffie-Hellman, I don't know. The new question is, did NSA break DH? I don't know if they did or not. You've heard of them, New Directions in Cryptography, published in '76. Solved some fundamental key distribution problems, key exchange problems. Big, big deal. It really sparked a lot of research and a lot of advancements in crypto. Witt was at Sun forever. He is a huge advocate and has been since the beginning about individual rights and privacy. Marty, people don't hear as much about him. Physical security too, he was an early advocate of the Beyond War movement. He has been worried about the specter of nuclear war and misuse of nuclear weapons since the 70s. He's an actual person with real beliefs and things. It's kind of cool. The third member that often gets cut out, as I did in the first one, is Ralph Merkle. A lot of people, unless you're in crypto, you don't know Ralph Merkle. Computer scientist, one of the inventors of public key cryptography, invented cryptographic hashing, has been a researcher on molecular nanotechnology and cryonics. He basically created a rudimentary version of what we now know as Diffie-Hellman as a college project. He's kind of a bright dude. And he often gets overlooked because he wasn't part of the Diffie-Hellman. These guys, maybe you know the names, maybe you don't. Ron West, if you don't know who they are, there's a little subtle hint. Again, these are actual people. They have some interesting interests. If I can figure out how to get my notes to be legible in my elderly eyes. So Ron, everybody knows, created all sorts of symmetric key algorithms, authored the message digests. He created the 3-ballot system, voting system. A paper ballot system designed to allow you to prove that your vote was counted, and basically a paper non-repudiation for voting. Why did he do it in paper? Ron Rivest thinks that the electoral process is too important to trust to computers. Ron Rivest says, our democracy is too important. And of course, he placed it in the public domain. Adi is one of the inventors of differential cryptanalysis. And Len, besides his theoretical computer science and crypto, is into DNA computing. He's looking at using biologics instead of silicon for computing. They didn't stop. You know, these guys are still out there. And you run into these folks at RSA and other conferences, crypto conferences. They're not as active as they used to be. But you probably don't know, even if you're a cryptographer, you may not know Jim Ellis, Clifford Cox, and Malcolm Williamson. I hit it twice. There we go. 1970 at GCHQ, Ellis was working on secure communications. And he wrote a paper, didn't actually develop it, but he wrote a paper on what he called non-secret encryption in 1970, which was instrumental in future advances in cryptography for GCHQ. For those that don't know, GCHQ is the UK's version of NSA, if you will. He wrote it, defined it, what it would need to do, what it would need to look like, how it would need to function, what it could and couldn't do. He wrote it in 1970. We now call this public key cryptography, which we started to see in 75 and 76 in the public. In 1973, Clifford Cox joined GCHQ. They didn't know what to do with him, new mathematician fresh out of school. They handed him Ellis's paper, said, here, read this. And he worked out a lot of the symmetric side of things, including some critical algorithms 5 years or 3 years later discovered by Rivest, Shamir, and Ullman. He created RSA before RSA. College buddy of his, Malcolm Williamson, very shortly afterwards joins. We don't know what to do with Malcolm. Give him that paper that Jim wrote. Those of you who are psychic or can see a pattern working, yes, he invented Diffie-Hellman before Diffie-Hellman. 74, he perfected what we now know as Diffie-Hellman. Now, it was GCHQ. They didn't get much value out of it. They didn't use it much. They didn't do anything with it. And none of this was declassified until 1997. Ellis was long dead by then, but the others are still alive. Clifford Cox actually is one of the inventors of identity-based crypto and was eventually chief mathematician at GCHQ, which is kind of a big deal. But anyway, this is a classic case of why I talk about government military folks. You know, and it's one of the things that when we discover things, when you find something, you're like, wow, I found something. And the people I really like are like, why did it take me so long? And then you Google to see if somebody else did. instead of having the ego to think that you've created it. But just because somebody else got there doesn't mean you can't take it further. Just remember there are other people who've been doing this. 5 folks that I will list. This is not a plug for Bug Crowd, but we can't not start with Grace Hopper. If you don't know Grace Hopper's stories, they're phenomenal. She was an amazing woman. The reason Bug Crowd has adopted her is because the term debugging comes from Grace Hopper. Mechanical switches, mechanical relay. She took a moth out of a relay to debug the operation of a system, and thus we have debugging. If you want a really quick introduction to how awesome she was, go to YouTube, find the interview with David Letterman. It's phenomenal. Her shtick was she carried pieces of wire. It's like, would you like a nanosecond? Here's a nanosecond. And it was trying to explain why satellite communications took so long. Why does it take that? This is how fast light, the radio wave can go. And she was just awesome. Anyway, Becky Bass is somebody who's still alive and active. She's teaching now. Becky Bass, a lot of people don't know, and people like me that are in the network security side, all the people that we work for, not all, the founders of the network security side, particularly IDS, all owe something to Becky. In many cases, they owe everything. She was in NSA. She drove that network analysis stuff. People like Marty Resch, Ron Gula, Marcus Ranum, John Flowers, and others all got a lot of advancement out of that. And so this was used by military and intelligence communities internally to detect bad things, but it created a huge chunk of our industry. One of the Becky stories that I love is that she's a Southern Alabama girl. And she moved north and married a Yankee and went to work for the government in DC. And before she left, her dad said, you know, when you're done doing all that, come home. We need people like you here in Alabama. And so some years ago, 5 years ago, I don't remember exactly, she realized she was done and it was time to slow down. So she did what she promised. She's at the University of Southern Alabama, teaching kids that otherwise wouldn't have access to one of the foundational brains in our industry. Bob Abbott is somebody that not enough people know. He wrote the first set of privacy and data confidentiality policies for healthcare. He's arguably the first person to make a career outside of government, out of security. He left government service and started being a consultant and actually did it. A couple of things. He wrote monitoring systems for open heart surgery patients. One thing that I will take a couple seconds to read, he was fundamental in the RESOS survey, research into secure operating systems. 71 to 76, and they defined, this is at the OS level, but tell me if any of these ring true as application security folks. He defined 7 fundamental issues in operating system security. And the good news is that decades later, these are solved problems, right? 1, incomplete parameter validation. 2, inconsistent parameter validation. 3, implicit sharing of privilege or confidential data. 4, asynchronous validation and inadequate serialization. So race conditions, time to checkout, time to use. Inadequate identification, authentication, authorization. Violable prohibitions and limits. We tell the program you can't do that, and but we don't actually write it that way. And then our favorite, exploitable logic errors. I would like to say, you know, the good news is we've got those out of our operating systems, and we're making progress there. And in the movie Sneakers, for those that have seen the movie, I hope you all, there was the NSA dude, the James Earl Jones character was named, Bernard Abbott was actually named for Bob Abbott. Bob Abbott was technical advisor, and the team that was in the movie, all of the people on that team were based on characters in the first red team at NSA, which was led by Bob Abbott. So Cool dude. Jim Anderson's another one. Everything from, he created the idea and implemented the first reference monitor in 1972. Audit trail-based intrusion detection in 80. Was a contributor to the Ware report. We'll talk about that in a minute. Follow-on report, the Anderson report. So anybody in Air Force security policy still has hooks back to the Anderson report. He was involved in Orange Book and other Rainbow series. He was UNIVAC to Burroughs and beyond. When he passed away, staff wrote an obituary tribute to him. Anderson had broad interests, deep concerns, great insight, and a rare willingness to operate out of the spotlight. His sense of humor and patience with those earnestly seeking knowledge were greatly admired, as were his candid responses to the clueless and self-important. That's a good model, right? You're really trying to learn? I'm going to take some time with you. You're impressed with yourself? I'm not. So sometimes in the darkness, there's a light, and we wonder if it's a light at the end of the tunnel, if the train's coming to run us over. You know, it's not almost the end of the year. We're going to start getting the end of year predictions, right? Yay, everybody's going to. The trade press is going to become more boring than usual. If somebody made the prediction, the computer will touch men everywhere and in every way, almost on a minute-to-minute basis. Every man will communicate through a computer whatever he does. It will change and reshape his life, modify his career, and force him to accept a life of continuous change. There are people that don't believe that today. 10 years ago, there are a lot more people that wouldn't believe that. Willis Ware told us this in 1966. There are only a handful of us in the room who were alive then. Willis Ware told us, this shit matters. He was a little classier than that. Worked on classified radar systems, did identify friend or foe stuff during World War II, was at RAND for 40 years, 52 to retirement in 92. Ware report was issued in 1967. Its fundamental value is not diminished in the intervening years. Decades before it was a popular concern, he was worried about the reliance on computers presenting serious privacy issues. Our first Data Protection Act signed by Ford in '74 was the direct result of him in '66 seeing what was coming down the road, working from then forward to protect our privacy. I would like to say that the government has not changed direction there. And actually, we just lost him in the past, just over a year ago at age 93. So let's move into some of the newer folks. And we'll go through this. We don't need to dwell on this, but here's cool stuff. These folks are around. Some of them are here at LASCON. So unlike the deceased and checked out and even worse management of old stuff, there are folks that you can talk to. This is how we got here. These are mostly in chronological order. Don't argue with me on it. I don't know. They're somewhat randomized. And I'm not going to really dwell on these too much because you should know who these people are, but let's bring it up. So Elcom Tough, variety of overlay attacks, the passive sniffer for OS identification, POF, browser hacking handbook, all sorts of things. He's currently at Google. He describes himself as a highly decorated solutions synergy ideation professional. His personal blog has some interesting insights on a Polish native now in the US, on Poland and the US, and difference in culture between Eastern Europe. So he is not just a terrifyingly brilliant guy, he's insightful as well. So that's him. This dude, I'm assuming most of you know him. He's been around a while. He still has his boyish good looks. Intranet port scanning, fierce scanner, slow Loris, clickjacking, you know, the hackers.org. He spoke this morning. He's at White Hat now, but he's one of the foundational figures. He's right here. I mean, he's hanging out with us, right? And he's also, I was put off. He and Matt J gave a talk this morning. it was not near as terrifying. Because normally when I go to Arsenic Stocks, I'm like, I'm turning off my phone, I'm done, it's done, no more. So he was actually kind of hopeful and like making tools to help make things better. So when I was researching all the old folks, it was tough to find information. And I'd pester Marcus and say, who do you know? And I'd like ask Spaff. And do you have any? And Google would find a few things and nobody would know anything. And I couldn't find pictures. You folks are all on Twitter. I am too, but everybody's on Twitter. I always try to credit photos. Nobody credits their own Twitter avatars, but boy, it's a lot easier to get most of these folks. And again, that's kind of because they're alive and active, which we should take advantage of. David Ross, cross-site scripting, Windows zones, X-frame options, things like that. David was at Microsoft. He's now at Google. He's another one of the people that, got us where we are. It was years before he wanted these two names linked publicly. For those of us in the hacker community, Rainforest Puppy is known for ending the disclosure drama decade plus ago with RF policy. Maybe not quite ending it, as it's still blowing up today, but RF policy was significant and still is a good starting point for any conversation for disclosure. But null byte injection, SQL injection, things like that. He's CTO at Blue Box now. He is another foundational figure who's still active. David Litchfield. I have it in good authority that Marianne Davidson sends him Christmas cards, even though she's left Oracle now. He kind of knows databases and kind of knows how to break them, right? To put it mildly. And he's pretty buff too. And he also likes to play with sharks. He likes to get in a cage and be thrown overboard with apex predators in the water. In spite of that, he is a pretty sharp dude. Mark Curfey. OWASP? Yeah, that's kind of significant, OWASP. I like Mark because we're getting close to somebody who's almost my age, as opposed to the rest of these children. But these people are still active. Amit Klein, I can't even give you there's a laundry list of what Klein did for us. Things like header injection and response splitting and DNS cache poisoning and in-session phishing. He's a trusteer now, but he's another one of the foundational figures that's still around and still with us. Bob Auger is here. You will note that there's no picture there. There are some pictures of him around, but he's made an effort, his Twitter avatar and LinkedIn and most places you find him, there are no photos. So I figure he doesn't want to be advertised anymore. So that's cool. That's, most of us are a little more public than we should be and rationalize it one way or another. CGIsecurity.com, Web Application Security Consortium. He's speaking tomorrow at 10 a.m., I believe. He's at Box. He's still active. This dude we all know, right? Jeremiah. We know not to pick a fight with him. Black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He likes Australian rules football, which to me is an oxymoron because I didn't think there actually were rules in Australian rules football. Likes to hack video games still. He's still got that going. And then, of course, like the computer-y stuff, clickjacking and everything else that he's done. And, he also, right, he still lives in paradise, but he's still back in Hawaii. Wow, that's okay. This guy, Weld Pond. Of course, we had to get somebody from the Loft in here. Loft crack, net crack, binary analysis, testifying before Congress using an alias when Loft did. There are some of the few people that have ever testified before Congress not using real names. It was actually a semi-official testifying because of, they have some great stories about that. I won't steal them, but if you ever get to hear the stories about driving the rented van to Washington, D.C. from Boston. Yeah, it was a good time. So anyway, this guy, Jeff Williams, he'll be here tomorrow at 10. He's why we have a top 10. That's where WebGoat came from, the SAPI. These people are still around still active, and are often eager to talk. Burp Suite. I'm a network guy, and I still like Burp Suite. Yes, right. This doesn't work right. Let's screw with things. Oh, look, if I do this, then I don't have to pay for the wire. No, I mean, I wouldn't do that. I have heard that there are creative uses. But Portswigger, he was actually just interviewed a couple of weeks ago on the Security Weekly podcast. That was a pre-recorded interview. I wasn't on that one. But, nice. No Script, FlashGot, Hackademics, Giorgio. Giorgio's the one with the glasses, by the way. He's, PDP, New Citizen, router hacking. These things that we take for granted, they're just part of what we do every day when we're trying to secure applications. This is what it's built on. Ivan, SSL Labs, mod security stuff. He's done amazing things on that defensive side, figuring out ways to test things, figuring out ways to secure things. Martin Johns, Request Rodeo, DNS rebinding. Still, he's not even 30. So yeah, the worm, session prediction, PHP session prediction, and other things. One of the really cool things about Sammy, he's a cool dude. He didn't mean to destroy Facebook. For those that don't know, he was charged and convicted, but Facebook didn't press charges. That was DA that made that decision. And he loves teaching people. He's got a YouTube channel that is packed full of stuff, and he's always working on stuff, and he shares any of it that's worth sharing. It's just cool. We interviewed him a couple of months ago. It was good. Mario, he likes to screw with people trying to put his name in wikis. PHP IDS, HTML5 security, things like that are what we think of when we think of him, what he's given us, and a lot of other people. So there's some resources I've used. The Babbage Institute, University of Minnesota, has some great resources. They have a lot of oral histories. Not much, actually, to the best of my knowledge. Yes, this is resizing weirdly, but that's why I have simple slides, because I could try to be artistic, and I suck at that, so I just won't. Not a lot of WebAppSec folk, but foundational people. They have a ton of information, but it's kind of a .edu. Wikipedia, usual disclaimers apply. It is entirely possible you'll find the truth at Wikipedia someday. If you're into the podcast thing, there are 3 podcasts who've talked to a lot of people in the industry through the years. Gary McGraw's Silver Bullet podcast has done a lot of those foundational figures that are still active. Paul's Security Weekly, no longer called that other thing. We've had a handful on Risky Business. Pat Gray's podcast out of Australia has had a handful of folks on. Very good stuff. And so I mentioned that this was a project. So this dude, he sort of changed the way we look at the world forever, is misquoted as saying, if I've seen further, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants. That's Newton. He changed the way we look at the world forever. Right? That's actually a line that he repeated that someone that he had learned from had said, which makes that actually more powerful. Guy literally changed the way we look at the world. And there are people trying to take us beyond Newtonian physics, right? There are people trying to disprove Newtonian physics. They have that giant underground donut out there in CERN or whatever, right? Who do you suppose hopes that Newtonian physics work more than somebody standing next to that metal tube and staring at a bolt and saying, you know, I hope torsion and friction and shit really work, because there's stuff flying around in here. I want to stay in there. So, yeah, I want to disprove him, but not right now. Let me get to the control room. Thus was born a really sad little wiki, but I am adding to it. A couple other folks are contributing. Shoulders of InfoSec project, shouldersofInfosec.org. I discovered about 10 minutes before I started that I still have yet to master Gandhi's DNS. But if you go to shouldersofinfosec.org, you'll get there. Some of the other URLs kind of get weird. But that's a blog and wiki, lists all the people in today's presentation, a few notes and relevant links. It's a work in progress. We're not quite done, I'll put that up, but you guys know how to use the internet. I'm easy to find. I blog, I'm very kind to my blog readers because I write very, very little, so I don't tax you much. Travelingcurmudgeon.blogspot.com is where that's allegedly my travel blog. That's where Jack gets drunk at cons, and also has an introductory home bartending series that needs to resume. So anyway, Shoulders of InfoSec, this last night I added a page off of the main page that lists these and other web AppSec folks. Main page has mostly older folks. There's also a page, thanks to one of my coworkers, who's been in the antivirus and anti-malware biz for a long time, a page of antivirus founders. Davi Ottenheimer has helped considerably in adding a lot of the hacker history. And so it's just a work in progress. And I'm not trying to compete with Babbage. I try to link to them. I try to find, but it's just a way to find people that got us where we are today. And maybe it's to thank them, maybe it's to blame them, but you know, it's a reference. And it's just a handful of links to, you click on there, you go to the page, it's, with this crowd, it lists their Twitter and their LinkedIn and things like that. Unfortunately, for a lot of the older ones, it lists obituaries, tributes, and other things like that. If you have anybody that you think belongs in this, in any category, if you have too much time on your hands and want to screw with a really horrible wiki, it's on PBWorks for anybody who knows PBWorks. We put security B-sides on there to make it happen really quickly 6.5 years ago, and now we have too much data to ever move again. And it's a non-standard wiki, and it's something I refer to as software Stockholm syndrome. But it's the one I know, so it's there. So, with that, we've got a few minutes. I'll take questions, comments if you want. Anybody have anybody that's missing? Comments, jeers? If you want, reach out to me any way you can find me at Shoulders. There's a link or whatever. If there are people that need to be on there. If anybody doesn't want to be on there that's on there, I haven't had this yet, but I haven't had a lot of current active people. Happy to, tear it right down. So it's pretty straightforward, and it's how we got there. And with that, I do have a couple of closing comments. This has come up a few times, and it's worth reflecting on. Why is it called the Shoulders of InfoSec instead of the Giants of InfoSec? We don't need to celebrate giants, particularly giant egos. What makes a difference is that shoulder, that we move forward, our knowledge base grows. It's called Shoulders of InfoSec because offering a shoulder is what's important. Every one of us can offer a shoulder to someone who needs it to help them move forward, and we all move forward. As a matter of fact, I would argue that offering shoulders is what makes us giants.